you would think you'd just be giving up a lot with 8-8. However, on this card, though, I would think this has got to be one of the best cards to actually continue to structure a bluff with here.
Stack, so effective low jack, I guess. And I opened at 60 with 8 of clubs, 8 of hearts.
Is that the standard open pretty much?
Yeah, pretty much.
8 of clubs, 8 of hearts?
Yep.
Okay.
Folds to the button, and he 3-bets to 280.
Okay.
So a little big, but we're deep, so not crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And folds the blinds, folds back to me, and I make the call.
So your head's up.
Yep.
Okay.
So we're going to the flop. The pot's 600, and the flop comes out 7 of spades, 6 of clubs, 3 of spades.
7 of spades, 6 of clubs, 3 of spades. Oh, I remember this hand. Oh, this is where I told you that I went into the pre-solved app because I wanted to see the flop response. So I actually just plugged this into Solver Plus. And again, Solver Plus is kind of a shortcut way to look at some I mean, I will give them credit for what they're trying to do over there in Crafty Wheel with this. You just have to understand how to use it because it's pre-solved scenarios, and it's only 100 big blinds. It's only 6 max. So there's definitely like a lot of different variables because obviously you're almost 200 big blinds. So you're not going to get the types of outputs, but I just kind of wanted to see what the response is from what you're going to do. So, okay, the pot's 600, it comes out 7 of spades, 8 of clubs, 3 of spades. Okay. Oh, excuse me, 7 of spades, 6 of clubs.
6 of clubs.
Yeah, 6 of clubs, 3 of spades. Okay.
And I actually did run this one in Pio just out of curiosity. I'm not an expert at that or anything, but I got some interesting stuff, outputs, and I was just curious what you think of it. So I checked, and the button bets 180, so really small.
Uh-huh.
And I decided to check raise to 560. Sort of for protection.
Right. So this is exactly what I wanted to see because I wanted to see which hands get to check raise. Now, from what Solver Plus had said, and also too from what I remember in these certain spots when I used to do top section with Conlon, and I'm pretty sure you're a top section guy, it would prefer hands that have like a backdoor and an additional equity, meaning that, if you were to choose the best combo of 8-8 to do this with, it would prefer to have a spade. It would also prefer to have 5-out draws here as well, meaning that I'm sure it would prefer to take 8-7 with a backdoor here and do that as opposed to like 8-8. I talked about this last week on content where, you get into certain situations when, from the flip side, when you're thinking about like calling, say, flop C bets, and someone's like, oh, I've got pocket 7s, and the board's like, Jack 10-3, right? And it's like, well, if you're behind, you only really have like 2 outs, right? But if you have like a pair and it's a 5-out draw, or if you have a hand like Queen 9 or something like that, you have so much more future equity. If you're looking at a pocket pair and holding on, it's a 2-out draw. And then if you look at, say, like middle pair and a backdoor flush draw, it could be a 6-out draw. That's 3 times more equity moving from street to street. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is not check raised without the 8 of spades necessarily in your hand. And if you had a hand like 6-5, that would get check raised even more. What did Pio say about your specific combination?
When I ran it, the interesting thing was if I gave it multiple bet sizings, it actually preferred to bet 3/4 pot on this flop. But obviously, I think the guy's probably betting small with this whole range. So I locked it into a small bet size, and then it had me raising 20%. And you're right, the 8 of spades was definitely preferred. It had the eights with the 8 of spades was raised at about 34%, and 8 no spade was less than 10%, like 8 something. So definitely the back door, which makes sense. And I thought about that when I did it. I'm like, well, it would be better if I had a spade, but I sort of felt like he might overfold to a raise there on that board, but he called, so a little not surprising. He can have a lot of overpairs and stuff in his range, I'm sure. So
now the pot's what, 17-20?
17-20.
All right.
And we go to the turn, and the turn is the 5 of clubs.
Right. And this is another interesting inflection point here too, because so the other thing about your hand is you do have some backdoor straightening equity here too, right?
Right.
So it's
And that's what I thought about when I raised it. I'm like, well, I better have a
right.
spade, but I do have a backdoor anyway, so
Now
it's terrible.
I don't remember if I got to this point, or I think it was at this point, at least with Solver Plus, it became irrelevant, right? Because it was only pre-solved at 100 big blinds. So you're never going to get this turn output, right? When you're starting at 200 big blinds. So I was like, what's the point
Right,
of even looking at this? Because it's either just going to be a jam. But, going with the theory here, obviously you take a step back and you're like, okay, I raise for protection with 8-8 here and I get called. Most of the time that's going to skew people towards having overpairs, right? And you're not supposed to just continue on like relentlessly. Eights with the 8 of spades, maybe you continue on a front door sort of spade, but so you get called, he's going to be skewed towards having overpairs. You would think you'd just be giving up a lot with 8-8. However, on this card though, I specifically with the 10% quote unquote of times that you're sort of check raising here with 8-8, no spade, I would think this has got to be one of the best cards to actually continue to structure a bluff with here. You've picked up extra equity.
That's what I thought of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems like, it's a great card for my range, but, besides maybe a spade coming in and, I pick up equity, but, then on the other hand, it's like, well, the flush hasn't come in, so is he going to fold to a bet on the turn with an overpair when he thinks I might have been bluffing with a flush draw? And, so I just wasn't sure what to do there, and it was like, well, I don't want to get blown off my hand either. If I bet and he decides to raise all in with aces or something,
he shouldn't really be raising all in with aces. I think the way that you manage the pot size is somebody and I think that's interesting too, is that you got to manage the pot size so that you never get him into a situation where he's faced with if he wants to continue jamming, right? So if you raised it to 560 and, you guys had put in 280 pre, so what is that? Like you've got like what, 2,300 left, something like that?
Just over 2,800.
Just over 2,800. So you don't want to take a bet size that's going to basically, even if it's like 1,000 or more, like if you bet 1,000, if he called the pot's 37, he only has like 18 left, he still, I guess, has a half pot size bet. I don't think you need to go crazy large. Some people's like response here would be like, oh, why don't we just bet like 1,600 bet pot? Well, it's a disaster if the guy jams, right? If he recognizes the situation. So I think maybe a more efficient thing here would be to bet like 1/3, 600 to 800. And then again, if you had structured with like, supposedly with the 8 of spades, maybe you can follow through on some spade rivers. You're probably not supposed to do that necessarily with this particular card, but you give yourself some leverage at the end, I would say. You definitely don't want to make that mistake of getting him to jam turn, that's for sure.
Once he calls the flop, I guess we're sort of thinking that our hand is probably not good. Now, This is maybe where Pio isn't that accurate, because he's supposed to be calling that flop bet with 75% or something, I think. So he's calling with even hands like ace queen, with no flush draw and stuff like that. So he ends up with a lot of ace high and overcard hands that I'm not sure that he's actually going to be calling with, in live. But then what Pio said on the turn was the 8 of spades should be bet, about 60% frequency. But eights with no spade, it had checked at 100% frequency, which I'm not really sure why that is. I didn't.
I don't necessarily know I don't necessarily know off the top of my head. I mean, again, just to simplify this, I just, sometimes we look at certain situations where we're like, oh, maybe we'll like bet large on this street and then just give up. I'm just saying that it would be a disaster here to have sort of our equity denied, basically, and then maybe it's a function of that where if you had the 8 of spades here, so I don't know, it's a function of that you could bet call there, although there isn't 3 spades out there. I'm not exactly sure, but you just don't want to get necessarily jammed on if you were to go super large. So what did you end up doing?
I ended up checking, and he thought about it a little bit and checked back, which, I guess is, he can be checking a lot of overpairs. It's not.
Yeah, it's not necessarily that
there's 2 flush draws out there, so I thought he might bet some overpairs, but did check it back.
Curtis King says Pio is like the media. You can't trust it. Curtis must be a GOPer. All right, so 7635. Of course, there's a one-liner out here to a 4 here, though, too, right? So,
Right.
That's why I think that the small sizing, too, like he might have to move off of some overpairs here, though, too, right? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I didn't actually.
It would definitely not be an easy call.
Yeah, that was one of the things. I should have just mentioned that before. I'm just staring at it. There's a one-liner here to a 4. It's not just like, I mean, it's. Even if a guy's got kings here and you go like 800-900, it's a pretty hard call to make, right?
Right.
So it goes check, okay.
And the river is the 4 of spades.
The 4 of spades. So 7-6-3, turns a 5, river's a 4. And now it puts a third flush card out there, right? It also puts a straight out there, right? The board is 7-6-3, 5-4, but you have a straight, a higher straight, meaning that you don't play the board, you beat the board. When he goes check here on the turn and the pot's 17-20, I can't imagine this is ever a big bet here. I think that this is probably going to be 1/3. I think I would probably go 600, 5 to 600 here. And the thing here at that point, you know, it's one of those laying a price for your opponent. So say your opponent has an overpair, right? That's not going to play on a straight board here. If you bet 600 and the pot's 1700, he's calling 600 to win 850. He's almost only getting 1-1 because he doesn't win your money. He's calling to chop. So anything over that amount, like if you bet 1,000, now he's calling 1,000 to win, say like 850. Also, too, you have to understand that it's the spade that comes in. So when you take a look at, you know, your check raising range on the flop, if it consists of some flush draws, although I would imagine that a lot of those flush draws would continue on the turn, he loses to those too. So whenever he's going to be getting like less than 1-1, I mean, it's just an awful run out for like red kings here or something like that, right? Where I just can't imagine the most efficient way here would be to bet anything more than 1/3 here at the end.
He's certainly going to call the chop with, you know, like you say, it makes it really tough for him, and it's not, you know, he can actually call the chop and lose to a flush that I have.
Right.
So
or an 8. Or an 8.
Right.
But I'm saying I don't think you can go too large, though.
Really thinks I don't know if you really would put me on an 8 checking the turn. I mean, it's possible, I guess.
I mean, here's the thing. It's a 3-bet pot. I get that. I just, again, I don't want to overthink it, like put myself in your villain's perspective, but it's such a terrible run out for what you are representing. If I was your opponent, I would not call 1,000 here. I would not call 1,000 to win. I don't think 850. So I think it's maybe 600 to 800 here to try to get him to give like 1-1 or something like that is the right sizing.
Do you ever check any value hands?
No. Fuck no.
Never.
No.
That's what I did.
I don't think so.
I thought that was a mistake at the end, but when the flush card came in, I thought, well, that's a terrible card. Like I can't.
Oh, and by the way, too, by the way, if the river is an offsuit 4, right, instead of the 4 of spades, you definitely get to go like larger, 12 to 1,300, and you're gonna get calls, because now he doesn't have to worry about a flush, right? So, but I mean, I just think that if you check, basically what you're doing is allowing some hands that would call a bet to just check behind and take the chop. I don't know if you were thinking that like you were going to try to get the guy to turn hands into like flush bluffs or get you off the chop, but usually the person who's first to act has that advantage. Remember though, too, this is a 3-bet pot. The button has 3-bet you. You're going to have more of this stuff than he is from him 3-betting. So you checked?
So I checked and I got lucky. He moved all in. And
he moved all in?
He moved all in.
Wow. So for how much? So button moves all in for how much?
28-10.
Wow. I mean, I think a straight you have to call, but that's a crazy bet, actually. I mean, that's 1.5x.
I mean, I checked with the intention of, thinking, well, if he's a thinking player, he's going to realize that, that I should never be checking a flush here, and it sort of gives him the green light to try to get me off a chop, and then I can just call his bet. And then he went all in. I'm like, well, that's a crazy size, but I don't think I can fold.
Well, I mean, I think
And,
going along with your logic here too, like it's like, again, it's, I think, somewhat of an illogical bet size from his perspective, just like probably making a large bet from your perspective from up front is probably a little bit illogical here too, because you probably, on these types of runouts, you'd probably want to take the same type of size with everything here. And you take a step back at this and you're like, why would a guy move all in with a flush here for 2,800? I can't call, because it's not like you can bluff catch against him and win the pot, right? If you don't have an 8, the best you can do is chop. So that's why, like, in these scenarios where somebody actually has something that's better than the board and the board is playing like a 5 straight, that's when you see a more consistent type of sizing, right? But it sounds to me like you're like, this doesn't make any sense, right? Why would he jam here with the flush?
No, and I guess he just, and my thought was, well, I've given him the green light to, basically try to move me off the chop, and he thought all in is the way to do it because he thinks, well, there's no way I have a flush, and it came in, and I guess he can have some flushes here. I mean, the turn card, if he's, calling with a flush draw and, that bad card comes, maybe he just doesn't want to, get blown off.
Well, he can certainly have some flushes. He can certainly have some flushes. I do though question the sizing though, because if you are sort of playing a sort of more advanced kind of game of kind of range versus range here, because you are getting such a worse price if you don't play the board, you can't really call. So if he has a flush, then what are you calling with for 28-10? And I don't think he can necessarily balance that out. Maybe with some people are saying aces with the ace of spades might be too. But, when you look through this, I think you'd certainly have a call the way this has gone down. So you called?
Yeah, I called. Mm-hmm. And I called and he said chop, and, he had kings with no spades. So,
wow.
Obviously he didn't expect to see the
I don't know if kings with no spades supposed to be doing that, but that's very interesting. And again, we can look at many levels here because it's like, who first misplayed the river? What's the optimal response? Because he might be like, well, you don't have a straight or a flush because you checked. Well, maybe one of the best things that you could have done, I mean, my first reaction was, no, I would not have checked, but maybe you're supposed to check some of the time with some of your weaker flushes or your 8X to protect the fact that he can't just move all in off of a chop, right?
Right. Just for interest sake, what Pi said on the turn, it had me checking 100% with my hand. And it had him betting aces, kings, and queens, but it had him checking almost all of his flush draws, which I was sort of surprised by. But he's supposed to check back almost all his spade draws
on the flop.
On the turn.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean you don't think that makes sense? That makes sense.
Well,
to me.
It kind of does. I was a little surprised that he wasn't bluffing with any flush draws, but
no, because if he has a flush draw and you check raise the flop, and then you check the turn on a one-liner here to a 4, you're not check folding. You still, you now it skews you towards having value, right? If he has the flush draws, the front door, right?
That does make sense.
So
that does make sense.
So it makes, and if I was in this guy's spot, I would be checking back flush draws a lot here also on the turn. I think a live hack that I might do, I don't think I would move all in for 28-10, but this is a Crush Live Poker Forte, like sort of live hack. And this is similar to people getting counterfeit, the true sense of being counterfeit, meaning when somebody like has a flush on the turn with 2 cards and then a 4th flush suit comes out. I've always said, like, if you have the ace of spades here, you can sometimes actually go larger than you would think because people will get frustrated and call sort of out of kind of like a tilt type of thing. So if I had a flush here and I was in your opponent's perspective and I played it this way, maybe I might go slightly larger thinking that I might get like a frustration call from somebody that had actually flopped something, even though they're only playing the board. Right. But I don't see how you go for like 28-10 though. But anyways.
On the river, the 8s were supposed to be bet and check 50-50, and so it was, according to Pato, but live, I think you're right. I should have went for a bet there, but it happened to work out.
Yep. All right, man. Thank you. Thank you very much for the
Thanks,
call.
Clark.
If you like what you've seen here, please hit the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this call in hand, hit the like button down below. To check out crushlivepoker.com, click on the link in the description. Use the code YTA300 to get the first 30 days for free.